Tara, take it away.
All right. Thank you, guys. Let me apologize profusely. I think my southern accent got to the Uber driver because he took me all around the world versus just straight up eighth. I guess I'm not supposed to know where to go. So I'm here now. We're here to talk about introduction to AWS Lambda Serverless Cloud. And I'm going to have to compress a lot of stuff now that I am tardy into a short amount of time. So if I don't get the chance to finish, I will hang around. We can finish it in corners and huddles and things of that nature. All right. Tara Walker, you can tweet me at TaraW at any point in time. Oops, going a little too fast there. Let's try this one more time. All right. So let's talk about really quickly, I don't know how many of you guys are aware of what our compute offerings are. We have EC2, so if you are a container, serverless, VM guy, you're very familiar with our EC2 offering. We have a new offering, or relatively new, it's a year or two old, ECS, so that's our container management service. It is running Docker. And what we're here to talk about today is Lambda. So that is our serverless compute. You have the ability to execute pretty much almost anything servicely for your workloads. And that's including kicking off ECS or EC2. So let's get into Lambda. What is Lambda? So first of all, Lambda is exactly like the others. It is a compute service. It's going to take your stateless, request-driven code and execute it on demand. That is exactly what Lambda is. And you can execute anything, whether this be to kick off a VM, whether this be to kick off an API, whether this is to kick off other AWS services. When we're triggering on Lambda, let's talk about what you actually don't have to do. So for Lambda, you don't have to provision any servers. You don't have to worry about at that point them being over capacity or under capacity. You also don't have to worry about deployments. You can really take advantage of the fact that over in Seattle, they're handling the fact that we need to deploy this on what server, what fleet, and making sure that, again, the scale is there. So you don't have to worry about scale and deployments. Another thing that you don't have to worry about is fault tolerance. Now, what does that exactly mean? If something goes down, typically what you would do is, I need to make sure I have another instance either hot or ready to go. You don't have to worry about those things either. We cover almost everything when it comes to running your code with Lambda. So we're managing your environment. If you want to know anything about differences, and I'm kind of assuming some level of knowledge in Lambda, so I don't have a slide exactly detailing it, but if you think about what you do with EC2, all of those things are being done for you in handling Lambda. So let me back up one really quickly because I know I'm going a little fast. How many people at least have heard of Lambda and know what it is? Yes, okay, good. So I don't have to go through this as much as I thought. Great. All right, so I'll just end this by saying what we want you to note about Lambda is you can bring your own code. You can bring your own native libraries. You can run code in parallel with Lambda. You can create multiple backends. Any kind of thing that can be handled with EC2 and ECS is there. Now, you can hear lots of talks that'll talk about the difference in when you use EC2, ECS, and Lambda. I won't get into that because you guys are familiar with Lambda in the room. So I'll also breeze through this because, again, you guys are seem to be great on Lambda. The benefits of Lambda are you never have to worry about paying for underutilized or overutilized services in your infrastructure. So there's no servers that are just sitting around waiting for a job. You know, there's no underutilized things that are costing you money because they're just sitting there waiting for some requests to come in. So these are things you don't have to worry about with Lambda. You don't have to obviously worry about over provisioning, and I said that. So your capacity, if you need it, we have it there. You also finally don't have to worry about the execution of how long this is going to take because I didn't provision it. So what Lambda does, we have sub-second billing. So again, it's not running. You're not being charged. So I'm not going to go into the other ones. Just kind of review. How many people are new to Lambda? And I need to go into detail because I'm limited on time, so I'm trying to make sure I'm being very astute with what we're doing. How many people need to know what it works? Or how many people are new and say, yeah, go through what it works? What it works? Okay, green light. All right. So if you're new to Lambda, you may want to know, again, obviously how all of this works, and we try to really make it simple. What we're going to do is we're going to take your code. Either you can do this from inside of Lambda, the console, writing code directly inside of Lambda, or you can upload a zip file or even have that zip file with your code on S3. And once you do that, at this point, AWS is ready to start deploying. You upload your code, you say, yes, create this function, and you're off to the races. And that is, we try to make it as simple, so I hate saying that it's so simple, but we try to make it as simple as possible. Once you do that, you are ready to run. There is no explicit other step that's needed for deployment. The next thing to note that the code you upload is stateless. So if you're looking to have state, then you need to do other things. For instance, I want to persist data to DynamoDB after I process this. That is where you would hold your state. You want to persist these files that you created from your data or created from your Lambda function, you could possibly do that in S3. So the key to remember about Lambda, once you upload your code, yes, there's no deployment, but what you're going to do as far as persist data, that's something you would do in your Lambda function because at its core, Lambda is stateless. So let's go on. Oh, I do want to mention one thing because we're down here on the bottom, monitoring and logging. So if you want to know what's actually happening with your Lambda function, we have Lambda now integrated into CloudWatch. So you can literally watch the data that's coming across in your logs in your dashboard. You can also see what's failed, the duration. You can even see how much you're being billed. So hopefully this will make it easier for you to truly manage your Lambda functions and understand what's happening. You can even see how much and how long it's taking from a performance perspective. And why is that important? Because you can, and I'll go into this in a little detail in a minute, but you can determine how fast Lambda runs based upon the memory you allocate to it. So let's talk about what services from AWS specifically are integrated with Lambda. So last year, a birthday for Lambda almost is upcoming, we launched the Lambda service. And in launching, we started with 3 main services. We provided a use case for uploading objects to S3, having Lambda detect that, upload, and then do some processing. One example all over the board was we would upload an image to S3, and then Lambda would kick off a function that actually ran that would manipulate that image, creating a thumbnail and or having other things added to that image, and then putting it back on an S3 bucket. So that's one example you probably saw a lot of. Another thing that was already integrated in Lambda in November 9th last year when we released was DynamoDB. So if you wanted to process records from a stream coming in, then you can store that data once you've processed it and manipulated it on a DynamoDB table. The other or final service that was available to you with Lambda with kicking off was Amazon Kinesis. So if you're not familiar with Kinesis, it's taking streams of ingestions of data. We're talking about billions of data records at one time, ingesting that, and then you could kick off a Lambda function to process that stream of data that was coming in, and then send it or persist it wherever you would like. So that's Kinesis. So these are the 3 services that we started with in November of last year, almost the birthday for Lambda, to make kicking off Lambda and the services that were available. Now, since that period of time, in April, we have truly expanded Lambda. And I'm just going to blow out this whole slide. These are all the other services now that you have. We have integration, for instance, with simple workflow. If you want to take actions in Lambda that are part of a workflow, you have the ability to do so. We also have SNS, so if you want to process messages, someone logged in from Cognito, you want to send them a notification in your application, you can actually tie those services as well. We've added a bunch of use cases around IT automation. And so you see CloudTrail and CloudWatch and those services there were there to enable more IT automation for you. Finally, the Lambda project, or the product that we promised you with Lambda, is the goal for Lambda, that the product group, you'll hear them talk about all the time, is to provide any type of service, either internal to AWS or third party, to be able to run in an event-driven serverless way. That is our goal. And so we're trying to make good on that goal by continually not only adding AWS services, but partnering with other resources to make sure that their code as well, or their services, can run in a serverless state kicked off by Lambda. So if you look, the ones that we came out with, for instance, at reInvent a couple of weeks ago, one is a startup called Arrhythmia. So they have a set of academic algorithms that need to run and process at a larger speed of time, a larger bulk of time. Instead of companies rewriting that process, for instance, machine learning or academia, they actually now have provided this in Lambda as a blueprint that you could use to create your own Lambda function using their algorithms and kicking it off. So Splunk, I think Splunk is a great example of how open we are to leveraging things that are not necessarily in the AWS suite. We obviously have machine learning, but we know Splunk is great for their services. And so we partner with them to make sure that you can actually leverage Lambda leverage Splunk within Lambda. There's a concept in Lambda, if you're not familiar, called blueprints. And we're adding those blueprints every day. And blueprints are just a simple model to say, hey, I want to use a certain service or a certain pattern. Go ahead and set up this Lambda function for me, and then I can add the details that I would want in kicking off this Lambda function. If you're not familiar, voice is really hot right now. We've released Amazon Echo. We have a blueprint in Lambda that actually can then take your Echo and your Echo commands and kick off Lambda functions to either get more information, kick off other processes, go to the cloud, do other things, activated by your voice in talking to the Amazon Echo. And again, everything I'm talking about from a partner perspective is a blueprint in Lambda. And then we have Twilio, which is phenomenal. You take your standard telecom, and now we've enabled that with the partnership of Twilio to be able to kick off a Lambda function based upon a resource you consumed in Twilio. So you get a text message that comes in, that text message comes in, you can have a Lambda function kick off, and then therefore have a service to respond directly to that Lambda function. So these are the ones that are now actually baked into the Lambda console and the CLI. So let's talk about a quick timeline of languages and features. If you were following the reInvent conference on 2 weeks ago, you would notice we did a lot of great things coming with Lambda. One of the first things we did when we first released Lambda is we only had Node.js and the event handlers. Not even a year later, in April, we then added functionality for cores. We had the functionality for mobile backends. You could now do synchronous calls, because as you are aware, Lambda is asynchronous. Additionally, what we added was resource policies for enterprises, so that you could really get granular on the resources that actually can run and be kicked off with Lambda and parts of that. So I want to do a put to Dynamo, but I don't want this Lambda access to have the ability to delete records from Dynamo. So you can get very granular on the resource policies there. So these are things we added in April. So this summer of 2015, if you have been following us along, we then added again another language. We added Java. We also then added Amazon S3 upload. So we could detect downloads and uploads. You have both that ability now at this point. So you can have S3 kickoff to upload to S3 now from Lambda. Before we could respond to events that already happened in S3, now you can actually kick off with something to be uploaded from S3 to Lambda. We added blueprints, and I've talked a lot about blueprints, but that was added in the summer of 2015 as well. And then we added the Tokyo region. I'm skipping over the 1.5 gig, I'll tell you that in a minute. And then we added the ability to talk to Echo. One of the great ones that people have asked us for a lot in the summer, and this is why I'm coming back to it, is the ability to load larger types of functions and have larger memory allocations to it. So when we first kicked off Lambda, you had a certain memory threshold that you could select to kick off a Lambda function. When we were working with larger customers, they noted that they needed more power, more provisioning with Lambda. And so now we have the ability for you to set the memory allocation for your Lambda function to be up to 1.5 gigs of memory. Now you can obviously scale that down or up. The option is now there to go as far as 1.5 gigs of memory. If you are aware about Lambda, memory is related to the processing power that you also get. So again, it is not just the memory that it's consuming, it's also the processing power that you have on the box. And finally, at reInvent, we announced some really cool things, just in case you missed it, that should be very interesting to you. We announced now we have the ability to work with Amazon Simple Email Service for inbound rules. And we've already done these integrations, so if you go in today, these are enabled. It uses lambdas and taking inbound rules. So if you got code, for instance, for spam detection and things of that nature and analysis, you can then write a lambda function that will be automatically invoked, and then it can result in what incoming email will come through or will not. So this is one resource. And again, this is all serverless, and this kind of computation is now available. We also add CloudWatch processing. So CloudWatch is great to look at what's happening in Lambda, but how do you then respond to what you see? How do you then respond to an error that happened in CloudWatch? What if you want Lambda then therefore to kick off another function based upon the data processing and the streams coming from the logs? You now have the ability to do that in Lambda. I want to see the logs that come across. I'm watching for certain things. I can now kick off a Lambda function then to execute either other services, other third-party APIs, or any other native libraries that you upload with your Lambda function, because that's also feasible. All right, so let's talk about the 5 updates that were really exciting at the reInvent conference that most people are really excited about. We have an addition of Python functions, increased function duration, function versioning and aliasing, scheduled functions, and accessing resources to the VPC. Let's talk about the new feature of Python. And before I talk about it, I think this is a good point to kind of quickly show you just a hello world demo of actually writing native Python code in Lambda and kicking that off. So let's switch this over. All right, so let's quickly just create a Lambda function. And this will also have the ability to show the blueprints. You'll see there are varying blueprints. I'm viewing one of 9. There are actually 27. I just want at this point to see the Python ones. Spelling it right is usually the first good thing. You'll see there's a starter for Python, so a hello world. I'm gonna just go ahead and click that blueprint. And I'm just gonna give this a name. You can see the runtime here is Python 2.7. And then if you look, this is Python being written in the console, and this is actually a function that's going to kick off. So here you see that, I'm gonna run it first and I'll alter it in a minute. I'm pretty much taking information in that's coming in, and the key values of key 1, key 2, and key 3, I'm just spitting those back out. This is just a very simple hello world. But again, this is Python code running. At the bottom here, you see that the name of this handler that will be kicked off is lambda function.lambda handler, and then I need to suggest a role. You can create a new role here or use an existing one. I obviously have a bunch of them, so I'm just going to choose a lambda basic execution here. And then memory, as we talked about, now you can go up all the way to 1.5 gig here, and then you can set your timeouts. I'm going to leave those defaults because, again, this is just a hello world. Once I have completed that, I simply go create function. Clicking the button will help. And now I'm done. So let's test this really quickly that this is working. So if I want to test this, you can test your lambdas from the console as well as from the CLI. So if I want to change this around, let's say the first value will be hello guys, if I can spell, we're at container days, and then to be here. Typing today is not working for me, but that's the way it goes. All right, so I'm gonna hit submit. Now, at this point, it executed by saying hello guys. And why did it do that? Because the event that's being printed and returning back is just the key 1. If you look down here in your log area though, it printed out to my logs each value that was captured. So hello guys, at container, happy to be here. You can then dynamically change this on the fly to, instead of spitting back, and obviously this can be much more robust than this, but if I wanted to then do another key, I can then echo this back differently save and test. I made that change. Scroll down. Oops. It would help to not hit print again. So let's try that again. Save and test. And you see it's hello guys, happy to be here without the space. But again, you're capturing the information going to your logs here, and it also tells you the max memory that it was used to execute it and how quickly it did or did not run. So that's quick Python. You can write Python again directly in the console, or you can actually upload a zip as I noted. I'll just show this here. You can actually upload any zip file or any Python libraries that you want to go with it. And here are the options for Kinesis, DynamoDB, but these are just starter. You can obviously just write them as you would like. And then again, if I don't want to write this code in line, I can upload a zip file, or I can have a zip file on S3, and so Lambda would go out and look at that zip file anytime it executes. So if you want to have something that's dynamically changing, and instead of coming in and putting it in a certain place, you can just have an upload point to S3 where your code is changed, and then Lambda will always go to that location to pick it up. So let's quickly go back to the slides. So Python support for Lambda is available today. It is also available in all the SDKs, including the mobile SDKs. It is available in the Amazon command line interface, the CLI, and obviously you saw that it's also available in the Lambda console for interactive editing. This includes version 1.13 of the Boto 3, so the AWS Python SDK, and all documentation and walkthroughs are available, including the console blueprints that you saw. Another feature that we released at a reInvent was the longer running Amazon functions. So I obviously don't have time to run a 5-minute function here, but you get to run functions up to 5 minutes long. Before there was a limit of 60 seconds. That limit is now gone and it's no longer available. You don't have to worry about that. You can actually run a function up to 5 minutes. And why is that? Let's say you have a function that's kicking off multiple services. It's doing very responsive crunching, video transcoding, and the like. What we found from customers was telling us that that 60-minute increment simply was not enough. Even with chaining other Lambda functions, they wanted one Lambda function to process these things. So you now have the ability now to have a Lambda function that will run for up to a 5-minute duration. This is available in only certain SDKs, and we'll quickly get out the others. So that's Python, Java, Node, PHP, Android, and iOS. Resource sizing. Let's take a moment really quickly so you can understand the resource sizing that I talked about with the addition of the 1 gig memory allocation. So we have 23 what we call power levels. You saw when I dropped down that memory allocation, there was a bunch of options I could have chosen. Those 23 power levels, we call it. So what most people don't realize, because they see the word memory there, is higher levels mean more memory and more CPU power. So obviously the lowest, which I ran my Hello World because it didn't need a lot of processing, was 128 megs. So that's the lowest. And then obviously the new addition is the 1.5 gig, which is the highest CPU power. Please note that higher power levels equal lower latency. And this is usually typically, as a best practice, for CPU-bound things and bursty tasks. The compute scales with the power level. So the more capacity, for instance, that you need to run really heavy things, you'll get a cost on the capacity used, but not on the duration. For things that literally will function, that will be literally waiting around, you don't want to allocate this to have this higher memory, because again, you're just waiting around for it to execute. It'll execute and then go back to us being in a not really a wait state, because it'll go back and not execute until that point you need it again. So this is not waiting around for you. It literally responds to our event and then it terminates. The duration is 100 milliseconds to up to 5 minutes. We talked about the longer one. You get to determine that as well. And then the free tier allows you to have 1 million free requests and 400,000 gig seconds a month. So when you look at the billing, it's 100 milliseconds. You get billed at that level for each 100 milliseconds. So again, the free tier allows you for 1 million free requests and 400,000 gigs second increments a month. If that makes any sense. 100, you get billed 100 milliseconds. Running really quickly. So let's go with the other new feature that I know a lot of people asked about, and that is scheduled functions. So I know out of time, but I'll quickly show you how you would kick off a cron function. And I actually have one running, and it's running actually every 5 minutes. So let's just look in on this on the monitoring. So you'll see here that I have, and I'll quickly do this, but I have one already running where it's kicking off every 5 minutes. And what this function is doing is it's scanning the Amazon.com, just a simple example. You'll see this, I'll do it in a second. Amazon.com for the words online shopping. And when it comes back, then it actually will show you data that's coming back from that of yes, it failed or not. And I'll show you the code in a minute. So if I look at this so far, it's run a couple of times. It checks the check pass, because I'm just returning the word check pass if it does find that word or not. So these are events that are firing, and they're firing approximately every 5 seconds. So you'll see each one firing. It passed, it didn't pass, or whatever, and that's firing. That's actually scheduled for every 5 minutes. You have the ability also to do cron tasks. Let me show you that. So really quickly, if I was going to create a scheduled function in Lambda, we also have a blueprint for that. It's called Canary. So if I would go in here and say create a Lambda function, you'll see here Lambda Canary. I'm going to just select that really quickly. It's using Python. And you'll see the event source type is going to be scheduled events. You say, I can say I want to test this every 5 minutes. You can change it, this is the name, but you can say this every 5 minutes. You can say it every 15 minutes, an hour, a day, or you can actually put a cron expression in there. So you can say, I want it to fire expressively at 5:59 on this day, on Monday, or every Friday, or whatever. You also have the ability to do that. So I'm just going to do a, just say, I'll just leave that right now. Test Canary. You obviously name your function. So let's look at the code really quickly. And again, this is just sample code that you can use to create your own scheduled functions, or you can start from scratch. You'll see that the site I have allocated, they have allocated in the blueprint we created, is Amazon.com. And then I'm looking for the words online shopping. I can change this to say look for anything at this point. And so the only thing this code is doing, just as a, again, sample, is it's checking as it scans this page every 5 minutes for those words of the site. So you see here it's looking for the actual site, and then once it checks, it's going to give me the time back. And it's going to give me whether or not it failed or it passed. If it finds an exception and it didn't find it, it'll give me a fail. If it actually found a pass, it'll give me the time that it found that. So this code is being run every 5 minutes. Again, you have the ability to do this as well, and that was what you saw running, where it's bringing back those logs and checking. So scheduled functions are live and ready for you in Lambda. So I'm gonna skip that because I know I'm over time. What I will mention is what's coming for scheduled functions that are not there yet is this SDK support and CLI. Right now it's in the console, but you can easily, pull SQS and other data services, as well as just what you saw from what I did. All right, the other new feature that we have, and I'm going to only take about, because I know we're 3 minutes over, going to take about, if you would indulge me, about 3 more minutes to try to at least tell you about the last few features. The other feature that we released in Lambda on a couple of weeks ago at reInvent is versioning. So I usually do a quick demo of this, but I don't have time, so I'll just show, when you're developing Lambda, we're just trying to keep it simple. You can do, if you don't care about versioning, then you don't have to care about it. Lambda will function exactly as it did before. You upload your code, you make changes, those changes will overwrite the last one, and then the last update will win. So this is how Lambda is typically developed and deployed now. So if you don't care about versioning, you absolutely don't have to worry about changing anything that you're doing. However, if you are interested in versioning, what you can do with Lambda is, I'm sorry, I'm skipping the demo that comes back to. What you can do is do a thing called publishing. So I have two versions. I have my initial version. You'll always note the latest version in Lambda because it'll say latest. This is one of those things that I'm going to have to go out and show you later if you guys want to, so because it makes it much more obvious. But what you can do is then take your latest version, you can upload it, and say, I want to publish this as the latest version. What Lambda would do is those versions are typical numerical numbers. So obviously the first version is noted as latest. When you publish a new version, then again that becomes latest, and then it goes from 0 on up, obviously. And so you can have multiple versions of Lambda at one time. The latest one will run unless, and this is getting to this, you can actually have versioning in calling Lambda functions. So if you're going to take advantage of versioning, you want a function or an application that's using the initial version, it didn't change, it's not ready for the other versions, or you want to make your own changes from versioning and keep your API and things stable, you can actually have applications point to certain versions based upon the functionality. And I just got the...
Got a bonus time.
Oh, I got more time?
Oh. 10 minutes of doom.
Oh, okay.
But
so
8 minutes of doom.
So I'll quickly just pop out and show you this then, because it makes much more sense seeing it. So... So let's show you really quickly what versioning looked like. I won't have to build anything, I'll just show you from what I already have. So I want to version this to look at a specific source. So I have my, the one I just created, the Container Days demo here. If you see this button right here, this has my versioning. So obviously I only have one versioning here, but what I can do here is say I want to publish a new version. And I could change this here, publish a new version, and this will be the latest. So if I change this, for instance, to say 2 instead of 3, and here I want to publish this new version, I'll hit publish. Then now I have the latest being version 0 and the starter version being 1. So what I was talking about before, so now you see the versioning, there's also aliases. And I'll get into that in a minute. But with the versioning, if I want to make sure that these aliases, these versions, point to specific things, now that I can do the versioning, again, I'm cutting off the demo a little bit, but you see that you can have multiple versions. All you need to do at this point is, there we go, is have a specific version. So you see now that we have 2. The latest version will always be latest, but the specific version are always going to have specific ARNs. So you'll see your ARN for your Lambda functions will be the normal ARN, and at the end of it, you'll see things like 1, 2, etc. What then you can do is then point, or if you don't want to use the names, let me go back, of the numbers, you can actually name your Lambda function. So you can have a named Lambda function for a version of production. You have one that's V1 dash whatever. And then you can then point your application specifically using those ARNs of the Lambda function to the applications. So instead of just pointing it to Lambda with the name of Lambda, you actually will point that ARN with the either name version of production or the version number latest or 0. So I said I would come back to aliases. Let me quickly explain aliases. Alias, you can alias any version, which means you can map a function owner to any code. Let's give you a great example. Let's say you are always working on various Lambda functions, and you want the users of your Lambda function to always point to latest. But latest could have a bug fix or various things, or you may always want them to point to stable. So even though you may have versions of stable, you might have versions of stable that need to be aliased. So I have 8 versions. 2 of them are versions that are stable. 2 of them are versions that are in development, and 3 of them are new features versions. I can have an alias, therefore, that the versions that are stable, anytime a user wants to go with this version that's stable, they actually will point to an alias. So even if this alias has various numbers and versioning, I can actually have multiple versions point to an alias. So you have your stable alias that you can change and update. You had a bug fix. What's also beneficial of this? What if you want to roll back? And instead of having to change the ARN that the applications are looking for to roll back to the previous one because you caught a bug fix after you published, you can just always have that application look at that alias. So the users of your application are not aware at any point in time that you have rolled back the bug that you fixed, you rolled back. They're always up and running because they're pointing to the alias of that code. API gateway functionality is something that is really cool about the Lambda integration. So if I want to provide not only the ARNs, and these are the applications that I'm writing and the versioning, what I also can provide is endpoint, a REST endpoint using API gateway. API gateway always had the ability to create versions. So now you have the ability to create versions of your API, your REST API, for those who want to use your API and your services. And those services in API gateway, then those REST APIs, will then kick off Lambda functions. And these can be versions. So version 2 of your API then can kick off the appropriate versions of Lambda as well. You can also have API gateway, because one of the things about API gateway is I can create a REST endpoint and then have this endpoint kick off the creation of a Lambda function and then have them version that as well. So again, you can also version both your code in API gateway and Lambda and then provide REST APIs in a version sense to your resources that are consuming your services. So for instance, Twitter went from 1.0 to 2.0, OAuth was prior to 2.0. You can then have, again, if there was a Lambda function associated with that kicked off. The next new feature is IoT backends. One of the exciting things that we brought out a reInvent is the AWS IoT service that we have. And it's amazing that we now have technologies that we can connect various devices to the cloud, match their state, turn them on and off, and things of that nature. So what you can do then with this AWS backend, just like you can do with the mobile backend and things of the like, is you can kick off responses to devices, telemetry data, or any data coming from these IoT devices from Lambda, from your AWS IoT service. Conversely, you can also have AWS IoT services kick off Lambda functions in relationship or in response to what's happening in your IoT devices. So this is something that also was kicked off with the IoT service, the ability to leverage Lambda as a part of that. So I have 5 minutes, so let's get into a sneak peek of something that I know you guys are really excited about. We are, at reInvent, you probably heard that we were releasing VPC Access for Lambda functions. It's something that has been asked about for quite some time with Lambda. So what's coming soon, and we're hoping to get this out pretty soon, is that you will be able to access resources behind your VPC directly from Lambda. So let's say I have my VPC and I have an endpoint. I should have a screenshot. I usually go out and do it, but I don't have time. Hopefully you guys can see that. Here I have my RDS table here. That my RDS is actually my database. It's actually running in my VPC, and you see what will happen is you actually have the addition of VPC config in now your services, or you will have in your services. So this database is running in my own private VPC. I can say, okay, in my Lambda function, which is Python RDS, I want this to know that it should be run in this VPC, and I just give it the subnets and the like. So I am literally out of time, and I'll just say this. So the bottom line, the steps that you would use for VPC access is you would select the functions to run in your VPC, like the Python RDS. You can select the subnets and the security groups you're going to use for it, and then your Lambda can be kicked off from your VPC. You can also access in Lambda your private resources. So you have the Elasticache there, Kentalk RDS, EC2 endpoints, or any other resources that is now currently in your VPC. You can actually then leverage those resources from within your Lambda function, just like you would do in a normal Lambda function, where you can access any other AWS service as well. This is launching later this year, so coming very quickly to a region near you later this year. So I know I am out of time, I'm going to skip ahead and just do this really quickly. It's your turn. I didn't get a chance to do that last demo, but if you want to see it, please let me know. I can show it to you out there. Go to the Lambda console, create a function, and run it. Again, the first million are on us. Once you do that, congratulations, you are a Lambda expert. It's really that simple. You can then add an event source, HTTP endpoint. These also can be third-party event sources, resources, not just AWS sources, so like Twilio and other things, and even ones that we have not put up there. Build a mobile voice IoT backend with a few lines of code if that's what you are doing, and then you can follow me on Twitter as well. Oh, okay, so I know we're out of time, but if someone asks a compelling question, I actually have a few AWS services resources to give away cards or free services. So I'll go here.
Suppose I wanted to access AWS resources with like Photo or something, and run it in Lambda. Do I need credentials in my Photo function? And I want to access stuff in the same account that Lambda is running in.
So you have the ability to determine how you want to do that. So with the Python, you can use the AWS Python SDK. So we actually load that for you. So if you want to use a specific role, if you want to use Cognito, any of those things, everything that you would do in any of the language we release is full access in Python. So if you wanted to create a separate role with different credentials, if you wanted to use Cognito to not have, which is a great best practice, and not have any credentials floating around, you can do that as well.
Okay, so I don't need to have like an access key secret access key in my code. I can just
Not if you don't want to. That again, we give you the ability to determine whether or not you want to do that or not. But again, a great suggestion if you have different people hitting on it, or you want it authenticated in different ways using Cognito.
Okay.
Yes.
When are you supporting Go?
So last time I was here a year ago, it was why aren't we supporting Python? We can't win with you guys, right?
Arbitrary code execution.
Right, I was like, yeah, it's just, we can't win. But okay, I'll give you this in a minute. I don't know. Again, we get lots of requests. We get .NET requests. I can't tell you what I don't know. So they prioritize of who presses the hardest. So you should probably go in the forum and really press if you really want to go. If you can find some followers that want it with you, then it'll go. That's
There's a way
Python.
to do it. You can actually put a wrapper, Node.js wrapper, and it still works, but it's not supported. It's not clean.
Actually, it is supported because last year at the same time, someone asked me I want to use Python, and I told them that exact thing. And we actually had a blog post about using Python exactly that way. So it's not that
It's
it's.
not on the list.
But hey, you could do it. In fact, you can upload any native library that you want to. So people tell me there's not a language now. I've shown them how I can run .NET using Lambda. I can use Golang Lambda. There is a way to do it, even without us supporting language. So.
Just evil. No.
Any other questions?
Yeah,
Yes.
I have a question. You have a set of functions Lambda, for example, interesting on the scheduling, right? As a part of CloudFormation stack.
Say it one more time. I want to.
A set of Lambda functions, let's say with schedulers, right? As a part of the CloudFormation stack. So I want to define the CloudFormation stack set of functions.
Okay, to that schedule functions. Yes and no. So we support schedule functions obviously in the console now. And so you could try to mock that up with JSON, but what ends up happening with the CloudFormation, we're leveraging a lot of the CLI stuff for that. And so that is coming down the pike really quickly. So the minute the CLI and SDK gets updated, then you'll be off to the races.
So I assume this is also available as of now, the part of the API request for AWS, right? To enable some functions inside of AWS, right? Within the Lambda, right?
Yep, absolutely free reign for
Last
that.
question, sorry.
No worries.
How do fits your code deploy with, let's say, the Lambda functions?
So because now we have workflow, you could do it that way. You could actually configure a code deploy with the versioning yourself, because again, if you upload a native library that would kick off something like Jenkins or AWS Code Deploy, or you could write a function that just sits there and does that, because again, you have full access to the full AWS stack when you're writing against Lambda.
So I guess my question was, Lambda functions a definition, like for in terms of source control management, right? You want to define source control management functions and deploy the functions that I let's say, CloudFormation.
You absolutely can do that now. I mean, Lambda doesn't care, right? if you have in Lambda, because you have full access to services with this Lambda function, its whole reason for being is to manage that process, then that's its whole reason for being. And Lambda doesn't care. I mean, you can literally kick off a full EC2 fleet with Lambda in a scheduled job. That's up to you. So we just give you full access to all of the services, and you determine what this Lambda is for. So you can chain Lambda functions, you can kick off EC2 fleets that kick off something that then may kick off a Lambda function. The kind of world is your oyster there. Your configuration is only what you can imagine.
Okay. Thanks so much.
How does this compare to App Engine or Heroku or something like that? And also, what would be like the ideal use case of this kind of architecture?
Tara, but just before you answer, just a quick point of note. We're starting a little bit late because we started a little late. 1:15 over in the other room. Thanks.
So I know I got a pack, so your question was about competitors and comparing.
Yeah, how do you compare?
So when we created Lambda, to be quite frankly, we did do a lot of comparisons. Our whole focus on, as far as competitors are, what do our customers want versus what our competitors are doing. So I really, again, have no knowledge of what App Engine is doing, or from a comparison perspective, any data points on that.